This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Days of violence and looting spark fears of fuel and food shortages in South Africa. Authorities in Tunisia say the country's health system has collapsed after a spike of the Delta variant of the coronavirus. And we look at how climate change effects are forcing some farmers in Kenya to abandon their traditional crops. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua, live in Nairobi. Hannah Vivier joins me now with your business headlines.
Thank you for that, Mahia. Here's what's coming up in business. Zimbabwe's state-run rail company reports a $1.6 billion loss in the first half of the year after COVID-induced economic slowdown. And South Africa's commercial property sector remains in limbo as the country battles a third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'll have those stories and more in business, but for now, let's take a look at what's happening in news with Mahia.
Hannah, thank you. We begin in South Africa, where President Cyril Ramaphosa says he might order more troops onto the streets to restore order after days of looting and destruction of property. The death toll from violent protests has now risen to 72. There are now growing fears of food and fuel shortages. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has the latest.
The looting, destruction and general violence was the order of the day in Soweto on Monday.
Hey, stop where you are!
Soweto is one of South Africa's largest townships. Major malls here have been completely ransacked. ATMs ripped out of walls. Restaurants, bottle stores and clothing shops all left in tatters. The raging unrest started last Friday after former President Jacob Zuma started serving a 15-month term. His supporters took to the streets to demand his immediate release. The riots have so far left 72 people dead. 10 of those were found in a looted shopping center in Meadowlands, Soweto.
Just here in Meadowlands, at this shopping mall, 10 people died yesterday late afternoon and were discovered by the police at night out of a stampede. And I know that the families of those who died at the moment, some of them wouldn't have even known that someone was part of the looting.
The Premier, who was conducting a walkabout in various affected areas in Gauteng, told the media that hundreds of people have already been arrested in the province. And that government and the business sector have started to count the losses, which are likely to run into billions. He, however, also acknowledged the government's slow response to the crisis.
I accept that in some instances you have had a situation where there were not enough officers on the ground, or the response was very, very slow, or it was reactive rather than proactive. I accept that, but this is the issues we have been sorting out in the last 24 hours, just strengthening police response.
Premier Makura added that as violence continues, the province's COVID-19 vaccination program has slowed down and oxygen delivery has also been affected.
We cannot afford this. We cannot afford this. And this has to come to a stop.
Heavily armed South African National Defence Force soldiers are keeping a close watch on the developments. They've been deployed to assist the overstretched police. The National Prosecuting Authority has also announced that it is putting together a list of special prosecutors. The prosecutors have been instructed to oppose bail for all those associated with economic sabotage and public violence. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
While the South African government is trying to restore order after days of deadly violence, looting and destruction of property. Police say over 1,000 people have so far been arrested. Asta Tal has the latest.
Over 2,000 soldiers have been deployed to the streets of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal provinces with one mission: to help restore order. Days of looting and violence have already left dozens dead. Police say a majority died during stampedes.
We cannot allow anyone to make a mockery of our democratic state, and we have instructed the law enforcement agencies to double their efforts to stop the violence and to increase deployment on the ground.
South Africa's economy was already struggling to recover amidst the pandemic. Unemployment stood at 32.6% in the first 3 months of 2021. The government is now warning that the looting will only exacerbate the situation.
This looting and the violence will lead us to a point we don't really want to get to that situation. That is why we are saying it's not just law enforcement only. Law enforcement and leadership of communities. We must all step forward and say looting cannot take place in our community. I'm calling on every community from the townships to the suburbs across Gauteng.
Gauteng province, the country's main economic hub, has witnessed widespread looting. This has left some business people feeling frustrated.
I'm a black-owned business and I have managed to create employment at least for 4 people. Now what is going to happen to all those people that were working here? I mean, it's not fair. We know the rate of unemployment is very high, but when we do things like this, then it becomes more higher.
The government is still working on gaining control of the security situation. Beyond arresting looters, Police Minister Becky Cele says 12 people are under investigation for inciting the violence. Asta Tal, CGTN.
And staying in South Africa, community leaders have partnered with security forces to help return stolen goods. They launched this initiative in Alexandra, a township in Johannesburg. Community leaders appealed to looters to return stolen goods. Looters have since last week stolen goods from several shops in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal provinces. Those returning the stolen goods cited financial hardship as the main motivation for looting.
You steal, you put back in the trailer. You're able to go steal at the shop, now it's time for you to take them back.
People were running around causing chaos and then saying they have no food, so they're going to get some. So I also did the same. I stole food. I won't even lie.
I stole some few things like cold drinks and electrical stuff, as well as some paint. I guess the real reason is because we have nothing, and when you see other people stealing, at some point you realize that shops will close and you will be left with nothing. So you ask yourself, after all of this, how will I survive with the way things are?
In Tunisia, the Delta variant of the coronavirus has caused a surge in cases and has increased hospitalizations in the country. Authorities say the country's health system has now collapsed. Adnan Chawashi is following the developments from Tunis.
Tunisian President Kais Saied has summoned medics and paramedics, including biomedical specialists who graduated in the last 3 years, to perform national service.
The Tunisian people must know that we will not lose the war. We will not lose this war against the virus. We will overcome the pandemic with our means, strong will, competencies, and the capabilities of Tunisia's.
Daniel Arap Moy has the details.
Zambia has witnessed a third wave of COVID-19 infections since June. The rising number of cases point to a high positivity rate in those being tested. And the health minister says there has been an increase in admissions to hospitals, with about 70% of the patients needing oxygen support. But it says it's working hard to tackle this health crisis.
Government has invested heavily by recruiting more, supported by partners, but we still welcome more support to ensure that we increase the number of health workers. Bed space, we've continued creating extra bed space. But at the time when we had so many patients, 1,300, you find that the bed capacity was overwhelmed. And also oxygen. Oxygen has been a key drag in the COVID-19 response. We've invested by increasing the number of oxygen cylinders, concentrators, oxygen delivery devices, but we still continue looking for support so that we prepare not only for today, but for the future, because it's possible that you may have the fourth wave.
The health ministry says it still faces challenges in getting adequate vaccines, but thanked China for its support on this front.
We commend the People's Republic of China, the government and its people, for supporting the COVID-19 response in Zambia. Africa CDC and the Zambia National Public Health Institute and the China CDC, we've been working together. Technical, financial and material support.
The government aims to vaccinate 8.3 million Zambians and express its gratitude to China for its efforts in helping the country fight COVID-19.
We are also delighted that the People's Republic of China has donated 100,000 doses of Sinopharm to the government of the Republic of Zambia, and we hope to receive these doses this month of July. So that is going to add to what we are doing.
The Ministry of Health says it's working towards getting more vaccines so that more people in the country are vaccinated against COVID-19. Daniel Arab Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has extended the country's latest lockdown by 2 weeks, citing a rise in COVID-19 infections. He says the country aims to vaccinate 1 million people over the same period. Here is Mahia Mutua with the details from Harare.
Business hours will be restricted to between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. A dusk to dawn curfew will remain in force. Schools will stay closed and intercity travel prohibited for a further 2 weeks as Zimbabwe tries to stem a third wave of the pandemic. New cases have risen by 43% and 466 deaths have been recorded since July 1st. In a televised address on Tuesday evening, Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa said the highly contagious Delta variant was the most dominant strain, accounting for approximately 80% of new COVID-19 infections. Now, behind me is a vaccination center where there is a long queue indicative of the increased vaccine uptake. President Mnangagwa said during this lockdown, the vaccination drive will be scaled up and a target has been set to administer 1 million jabs over the next 2 weeks. By July 13th, 955,000 people had received their first dose and more than 619,000 people had been fully vaccinated. Mahia Mutua, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Meanwhile, Zimbabweans in Harare have been queuing for kilometers outside one of the capital's main hospitals. They hope to be vaccinated against COVID-19, but many fear that there are just not enough jabs. This as the country is recording a huge jump in the number of new infections amid fears of a third wave of the pandemic. Nokutula Shabalala has more.
Andrew Ngwenya and his family traveled about 11 kilometers from their home to Nyatwa, a major referral hospital. Here, COVID-19 vaccine doses are sometimes available. But by noon, the nurses often tell people to return home and try get the jab on another day.
I visited this, this major hospital, Nyatwa Hospital. When I got there, the queue is like 5 kilometers. Even if you are interested in a jab, you can't stand that. Because I've been there like sometime around 8 at Nyatwa, up to 12. Only maybe a few, maybe 30 people were saved. From 8 to 12. Even the staff as well. They are not all that encouraging, the way they do it as well. I think it's due to poor wages.
As a part-time pastor with a Pentecostal church, Ngwenya and members of his flock are now praying for divine intervention.
We are just now preaching to people and we are praying for people. Because there is no jab and people are becoming, now they are resorting to faith. a lot, and they are coming.
Yeah.
And we are praying for them.
Zimbabwe has so far been using the two Chinese COVID-19 vaccines, Sinopharm and Sinovac, to inoculate its population. The country has received several batches of Chinese vaccines to ramp up its national vaccine program. The Southern African nation hopes to vaccinate at least 60% of its 15 million strong population to achieve herd immunity. But so far, only less than 1 million people have been vaccinated.
I was here as early as 3 a.m. I was on number 5. Now it's almost 8 a.m. They are telling us there's no first vaccine, it hasn't arrived. But in the news we're told that there's plenty of vaccine which has arrived in the country and is being distributed all over the country and across all provinces.
This is frustrating. Imagine this big hospital has no vaccines. It's shocking. People are desperate.
Zimbabwe is one of more than 14 African countries where the Delta variant is quickly spreading. The Southern African country has reported more than 70,000 COVID-19 cases and more than 2,200 deaths by mid-July. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
Now, the Tunisian National Army is vaccinating thousands of its citizens in the southern regions of the country at vaccination centers and at home. The Tunisian president has ordered military health personnel to vaccinate people in the governorate of Tataouine. Here is Adnan Shawashi with more details.
Tunisian President Kais Saied formed task forces made up of representatives of the armed and security forces and health officials under the supervision of the Director General of Military Health. This new strategy will step up vaccination operations south of the country in accordance with the recommendations of the Scientific Vaccination Committee.
As part of the national effort to fight the coronavirus pandemic, and following orders of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and President of the Republic, the General Directorate of Military Health dispatched an experienced medical and paramedical staff to set up the vaccination campaign for all citizens of the Governorate of Tataouine.
The director of the Tataouine Military Health Facility says all adults aged 50 and over will be vaccinated in the next few weeks. In addition, the military health personnel will also vaccinate the people who have a chronic disease or a health problem that increases the risk of complications from COVID-19.
We chose the Governorate of Tataouine because the uptake of vaccination was very limited. Despite the fact that this region represents around 1/3 of the country, the number of vaccinated citizens was too low. This campaign aims to vaccinate the maximum number of people.
The vaccination operation led by the National Army starts early in the morning and continues late into the night. Military medics and paramedics are vaccinating elderly people in the country's most remote places.
May God protect the army and save Tunisia. Thank you for bringing the vaccine. Tunisia will remain strong and defeat the virus.
President Kais Saied decided to divide the country into districts comprising 2 or more governorates, according to the incidence rate per 100,000 inhabitants over the last 14 days.
The Governorate of Tataouine and many other regions in Tunisia are suffering from a large spread of the coronavirus. People here are hopeful that the ongoing vaccination campaign will curb the high number of infections and deaths. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Turning further afield now, in Afghanistan, the Taliban says it has captured a strategic border crossing with Pakistan. It comes as U.S. forces step up their withdrawal. Our correspondent Sultan Faizi has more from Kabul.
Spin Boldak is very important indeed because the Afghan government has lost 3 different trade gateways in western part of the country in the past couple of weeks, and today there was another major blow for the Afghan government that they lost Spin Boldak, and also we have another contested areas that the gateways have, close to the gateways, and still there are fightings going on. But the problem is that how these gateways should be controlled, because Iran has stopped exporting goods to Afghanistan, and this has a direct effect. However, I can give it an overall estimation of how many trucks have been crossing the Afghan frontiers on a daily basis is nearly around 1,000 trucks. And how many have been stopped so far? We don't have any estimations yet, but it definitely has a direct effect on people's economy, on governments developing programs, as we saw on the media that the Ministry of Finance said on Saturday, that announced that the suspension of optional projects whose total value in the national budget document reached around $1 billion, which is quite a huge amount for the Afghan economy. And Afghanistan's government is more focused on allocating the budgets on fighting, as Ministry of Economy, actually Finance, said that they provided necessary funds for security issues, which are important and priorities of government for the timely fulfillment of the salaries of civilians and military personnel, and for the other needs of the Afghan government agencies.
Well, Afghanistan is a major focus as foreign ministers gather in Tajikistan for a Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. Stuart Smith has more.
Well, this special meeting of the SCO contact group underlines just how important this is. It's the first time since 2005 that this group was founded, when foreign ministers are meeting to discuss the situation in Afghanistan, which, since the US announced its withdrawal as well as NATO troops, is quickly descending into chaos, with the Taliban and the Afghanistan government fighting frequently, and the Taliban having taken major swaths of the Afghanistan territory. Now, in terms of discussions, 6 of these SCO nations border Afghanistan. So in light of the US withdrawal, it really is these nations that believe it's their time to come up and try and talk and negotiate. China, of course, calling for a peaceful settlement here, not looking for any form of military intervention. Using economic and diplomatic means will be the priority for all foreign ministers at this meeting.
Turning to East Africa now, climate change has led some farmers in Kenya to change the crops they grow to ensure adequate earnings and harvests. Some have been forced to stop growing crops they had relied on for many years due to persistent challenges. CGTN's Nick Mudimba caught up with a farmer in Kenya who's enjoying the benefits of switching to fruit cultivation.
Kenya's North Rift has been known for many years as a leading producer of maize, but many farmers there are abandoning growing that crop. Dr. Nesmas Ngetich is a farmer and a university lecturer. He quit maize farming due to the difficulties he faced and is now fully focused on fruit farming.
We are currently in the, trying to spread the message of diversification because of the opportunities that most of these other plants give to farmers in terms of income. Corn production has been declining over years, and many growers have experienced a decline in production from maybe 30 bags an acre to 15 and like that. So, and then also the market prices and the free, market for the importers. That one has brought down the cost of the prices of maize.
The transition has given Dr. Ngetich financial freedom in ways he didn't expect. He's growing a variety of fruits at his farm and is now more focused on selling fruit tree seedlings so as to encourage other farmers to emulate him.
Fruit production gives a big opportunity, both for local and for international market. The prices of fruits in the market, the common market, is good, it's high, especially for growers. Because if you produce for avocados, for apples, for papaya, for, name them, passion fruits, tree tomatoes, their prices are relatively higher.
His new venture has placed him on the international map as more farmers across Africa and beyond are ordering for seedlings. But the demand, according to him, is overwhelming at times.
A client in Ghana who requires 250,000 runners of strawberries. But currently, we tell them we are still supplying other places. Of course, we are trying to bulk and probably provide. So there's an opportunity. So there's an opportunity in production and also in the nursery.
As a farmer, he wants to engage in sustainable farming that will also address nutritional needs of the local population.
He's been able to cater for his family and for himself, and also he's been able to pay more than 5 workers to maintain the gardens. Right now, his main focus is to go higher and, of course, increase the acreage of his fruit farming. For now, he's happy with what he's got, and, of course, productivity is his endgame. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Uasin Gishu County, Kenya.
Now, in South Africa, the country's first fully electric buses have begun operating in the city of Cape Town. The vehicles, which were launched by a private bus operator, will be part of a feasibility study exploring the costs of cutting carbon emissions generated by the public transport system. CGTN's Travers Andrews has more details.
Cape Town's 2 new electric buses are meant to assist the country reduce the carbon emissions from its public transport system. The fully electric vehicles were rolled out by public transport provider Golden Arrow Bus Services and have begun ferrying passengers. The company is utilizing the electric buses as part of a feasibility study, which aims to incorporate e-mobility into the business.
At the stage now where 2 of our depots are carbon neutral and we're exporting electricity back into the grid. So that kind of got us started on thinking, what else can we do to make ourselves sustainable? And obviously electric buses are the vehicles of the future. And so when the opportunity came along to partner with BYD and Uyilo e-mobility program to create a feasibility study on electric buses, we absolutely jumped at the chance.
The buses were manufactured in China by BYD and are near silent on the road. For many passengers, that gives them a far more pleasurable commuting experience. The buses are currently being operated on a hop-on, hop-off route within the city, but plans are underway to expand their testing.
In South Africa, there's no data at all on electric buses. So we're very different from a European or Asian market. Our needs, obviously, we've got issues with our power supply in the form of Eskom. There's no tax incentives from government to use these kinds of vehicles. They cost twice as much as a normal internal combustion engine. So the aim with the feasibility study is to create a study that shows all of the issues that we could possibly encounter.
But for now, Cape Townians are jumping at the chance of experience what public transport could be like in a clean and greener future. Travers Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
To Chad now, where the director behind Lingui, a Cannes Film Festival entry about a teenager's battle to get an abortion, says he hopes the film resonates with many people around the world. Mohamed Saleh Haroun says reading stories about babies abandoned or killed by their young mothers in Chad inspired him to create a film that touches on this thorny subject. Let's take a look.
Lingui, which translates as the Sacred Bonds, is a Chadian film that centers on a single mother named Amina. Amina is horrified after learning her 15-year-old daughter Maria has fallen pregnant. But despite being terrified at the idea of going against religious principles, Amina is eager to help her daughter Maria.
I'm also a young mother, and when the film shoot started, I had just given birth. My baby was 3 months old, so I could put myself easily into the role. And as a single mother, I understood how we struggle. I realized that this could happen to my daughter as well. So when I slapped her, I was feeling that it was my own daughter, and I was crying, she was crying. It was real. In the film, the tears were real.
Abortion in Chad is only allowed in specific cases where a woman's life is in danger. But despite this, there have been many stories reported about babies abandoned or killed by their young mothers in the country. The director of the film hopes to bring to light the different challenges young mothers in the world face regularly.
Speaking to women, it turns out that these are struggles they have been going through for so many years, but they don't talk about it because it's shameful, it's a taboo, so they keep it to themselves and they sort it out the best way they can. And as this issue affects a lot of countries today, whether it's in Latin America, even in the United States, there are people who are against it. In Morocco, everywhere, I think that this voice from Chad can also speak to other people across the world.
The film is vying for the top prize at the Cannes Festival. The director, Haroun, has previously won distinctions in the competition and hopes to secure an award this time around. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
You're watching Africa Live. Here is a quick reminder of our top stories this hour. In South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa says he might order more troops onto the streets to restore order after days of looting and destruction of property. The death toll from violent protests has now risen to 72. There are now growing fears of food and fuel shortages. In Tunisia, the Delta variant of the coronavirus has caused a surge in cases and has increased hospitalizations in the country. Authorities say the country's health system has collapsed. And Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa has extended the country's latest lockdown by 2 weeks, citing a rise in COVID-19 infections. He says the country aims to vaccinate 1 million people over the same period. And those are your top stories. Let's now go to Hannah for the latest business news. Hannah?
Thanks for that, Mahia. Here's what's coming up in business. Zimbabwe state-run rail company reports a $1.6 billion loss in the first half of the year after COVID-induced economic slowdown. And South Africa's commercial property sector remains in limbo as the country battles a third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market. It's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Time now for the business news. The National Railways of Zimbabwe lost over $1.6 billion in the first half of the year. That's according to the latest data released by the parastatal. According to the company's board chairman, the state-run railway lost about $506 million in potential revenue during the first quarter. The second quarter saw losses exceeding $1 billion. Last year, the rail company moved 2.5 million tons of cargo, down from 2.8 million tons a year earlier. The dip in freight volume was largely attributed to the detrimental impact of COVID-19. The company had set a target to move 4.5 million tons of cargo this year, but now that seems highly unlikely due to COVID-19 restrictions. Well, sales of new motor vehicles surged 35% in the first half of the year as Kenya's economy continued to recover from the shocks of the COVID-19 pandemic. Data from Kenya Motor Industry Association shows that formal dealers such as Simba Corporation, Toyota Kenya, and Isuzu East Africa moved a total of 6,246 units in the review period compared to 4,628 units the year before, when the coronavirus disruption was most severe. As uncertainty mounted, sales of new vehicle sales fell to 26.4% in the first half year ended June 2020 from 6,294 a year earlier. The sales rebound in the 6 months to June signals continued economic recovery amid reduced COVID-19 deaths and resumption of most socio-economic activities. We head over to South Africa now, where farmers have been hard hit by days of unrest and looting as trucks carrying their produce have been prevented from delivering to market. Since the weekend, crowds have clashed with police and ransacked shopping malls. Dozens of people have been killed. The unrest, which began due to grievances over the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma, have since boiled over into what is being described as the country's worst violence in years. Some of South Africa's major highways have been closed off. Old sugar mills in KwaZulu-Natal, which is the main sugar-growing region, have shut down. This after cane trucks were hijacked, mills threatened, and farms set alight. Citrus exports have also come to a standstill. Trucks are unable to use the main roads to the Durban port, where more than half of the country's citrus fruit is exported. Well, we're staying in South Africa, where the commercial property sector remains in limbo as the country battles a third wave of COVID-19. Most corporate employees have been told to work from home since the first hard lockdown last year. A year later, many of these company buildings are still empty. CGTN's Smitra Naidu now tells us how this is impacting the economy.
Commercial property landlords lost over $2 billion in rental income during April and June 2020. Property owners agreed to write off the arrears as COVID relief.
And then some of the landlords were saying, well, I can't carry on paying the bond and the levies, I'm going to sell. So the cheaper ones seem to be doing a lot better, but we did do deferred payments with them.
But relief efforts are running thin on the ground. Most relief schemes have stopped.
We're basically relying on daily sales, which has put us in a terrible position to make rental. We are behind, but we have been in negotiations with our landlord all the time, you know, just keeping up to date to say, okay, we can do this amount or that amount. And I think showing the willingness that we are able to try and pay something, she's been lenient with us. The sales has also dropped drastically, you know, from what we used to do to what it is now. It's not good at all.
Employees of big companies, including the banks, were forced to work from home last year. A year later, they're being told to continue working from their homes until further notice. Some companies have even cancelled their leases, leaving scores of office blocks empty.
The Hyatt Hotel here in Rosebank has been closed since last year. This hotel caters for mostly business people coming into the CBD. There's still no clarity on whether this hotel will ever open again.
It's not an easy one because a lot of people are still struggling out there. I haven't had to go to the housing tribunal to report anybody because you kind of work with each other. People need accommodation. It hasn't been easy, and what can one say is that companies are just missing their employees. I actually don't know how it's going to improve, not with the lockdown and with so many people being affected by the COVID.
Credit data shows nearly 500 businesses have entered business rescue under the Companies Act since April last year. Heavily invested landlords will suffer the most, with little or no return on investments, and as the pandemic shows no signs of slowing. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Egyptian Stock Exchange has begun trials of a new system that aims to improve accuracy, increase trading volumes, and boost foreign investment in Egyptian shares. The board is considering introducing an auction system to determine closing prices, a method used by some of the world's biggest exchanges. Reporting from Cairo, here's CGTN's Yarsar Kim.
The Egypt Stock Exchange current closing price system is based on the average share price throughout the trading session each day. However, the new mechanism under testing is the auction one that will determine the closing price for the day.
The new pricing system calculates the average price in the last half hour of trading. And not just the last half hour, but an average from every hour is considered during the day. The main element, though, is the average of the last hour to calculate a price that will open the market on the following day. The boss is restructuring regulations to refresh the market and make it highly efficient and professional. This reduces manipulation and gives more accurate assessments of each share price.
Egypt's stock exchange has been suffering from lack of activity and low foreign investment volumes. Furthermore, a number of initial public offerings or IPOs that would have stimulated the market has been postponed from 2020 till the end of 2021. This is to shore them from the contraction in the market that has been caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Meanwhile, officials have finalized 3 simulation sessions to test the new mechanism, which they hope would improve investor confidence. But some traders are worried.
We are surprised about how quickly they want to apply the new pricing mechanism. We need more time to understand the system and study it thoroughly. The haste by officials has made us traders a bit worried. Overall, it is a good initiative for the market, but we need to understand it clearly, all the technical details, to be able to apply it in our work.
The EGX board says it's addressing all concerns and is planning to introduce the auction pricing system beginning in August. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Foreign direct investment inflows and actual use rose by nearly 30% during the first 6 months of the year in the Chinese mainland compared with the same period in 2019. The Ministry of Commerce says inflows and actual use of FDI in the country amounted to nearly 608 billion yuan in the January to June period. That's up 28.7% from the same period in 2019. The data, however, excludes FDI usage in sectors such as banks, securities, and insurance. FDI in the services sector rose by 33% to over 480 billion yuan, while investment in the high-tech sector went up by 40% over the first 6 months of 2019. Investment from the countries along the Belt and Road and the ASEAN rose by about 50%. Investment from the European Union grew by 10% in the same period. Central China saw the biggest increase in FDI at 33%. Well, China's banking and insurance sector saw stable growth in the first half of the year and continues to support the real economy. The Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission on Wednesday reported a 9% increase in total bank assets from January to June. There's also a 15% surge in the balance of insurance fund in the same period. The Commission says banks have been prioritizing lending to small businesses, information technology, research and manufacturing, while reducing new loans in the property markets to better control risks. Well, that's all the business news we have for you for now. But coming ahead on Global Business at the top of the hour, security agencies have struggled to restore order in parts of South Africa amid civil unrest and widespread looting. There is growing fear of food and fuel shortages as disruption to farming, manufacturing and oil refining began to bite amid the country's worst unrest in decades. We'll explore this and plenty more at the top of the hour. But now, more in Africa Live with Mahia.
Anna, thank you very much for that. Well, still to come here in the sport. Positive coronavirus cases derail South Africa Rugby Sevens and Refugee Olympics teams' plans.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Welcome to the sport. Now, the risks of hosting an Olympic Games during a global pandemic were highlighted on Wednesday when the South African Rugby Sevens team was sent into quarantine. The Blitzbokke are in danger of missing the tournament after a passenger on their flight to Tokyo tested positive for COVID-19. CGTN CS du Plessis has more.
At this stage, it is a precautionary move, standard procedure from the authorities to have the entire squad and coaching staff isolated at a hotel 30 minutes from the Olympic Village in Tokyo. Despite all testing negative, they'll need to test again on Wednesday morning before any decision can be made on when they'll be able to allow to travel to Kashima to begin their pre-tournament preparations for the event that kicks off on July 26th. According to SA Rugby, it now needs to be established which of the players and coaching staff were in close contact with the infected passenger, who, I might add, is not linked to the squad in any way. Those who are deemed to be in close contact will have to be quarantined for an additional 3 days and produce a negative test before being cleared to attend the warm-up camp, while those who are not and test negative will be allowed to leave and begin training as soon as Thursday. The statement from SASCOC earlier has sparked much commotion and speculation, with many media sources claiming that the team that won bronze in Rio de Janeiro were all but ruled out of the Games. But word from SA Rugby is that the medical staff are confident that no one is likely to test positive, and they have taken all precautions to avoid transmission, and that the entire squad will be able to continue with their all-important preparations. According to medical experts, people infected with the Delta variant usually tend to show symptoms in 4 to 5 days, as opposed to 10 to 15 with previous variants. The Blitzbokke are considered gold medal contenders and will come up against Kenya, the USA and Ireland in Pool C when the tournament gets underway. It is, however, a stark reminder of how quickly plans can change, how much is at stake, and that the world is still very much grappling with a deadly pandemic. CS Du Plessis, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, Pool C rivals Kenya stepped up training in Kurume City in Japan on Wednesday as they seek to progress into the last 8 of the Tokyo 2020 Rugby Sevens competition. The Kenya Sevens, also known as Shujaa, arrived in Kurume on Sunday and will be based there until they head to Tokyo for the Olympics. Speaking on Wednesday, head coach and former Kenya Sevens captain Innocent Simiyu said the training camp was important for his squad to acclimatize to the conditions in Japan, and they were focused on fine-tuning their game plan before competition starts on the 26th of June. Simiyu noted that group rivals Ireland were not the rank underdogs as they seek to finish among the top 2 in the pool that also has continental rivals South Africa and the United States. With the event being held in the middle of a pandemic, Simiyu said it would be a factor in deciding the tournament winner.
COVID is a factor to all the teams. We don't know even if all the 12 teams will be there on match day. So it's a factor, it's an issue of us just adapting to it, being agile in our plans and adaptive so that we ensure that we have a team when we play our game one, and also have a strong team prepared and ready to play. So I think with COVID being a factor, it also means that the Olympics can go either way, because we don't know if 4 teams are ruled out because of COVID, then what happens? Sure. So we really have to take the precautions and the guidelines, being the guidelines from back at home, World Rugby, and also the guidelines for Japan and Kurume cities.
Now, the refugee Olympic team due to compete at the Tokyo Games has this month has delayed its arrival in Japan following a positive COVID-19 case by a team official in Qatar, the International Olympic Committee said today. Some 26 of the 29 refugees are in a training camp in Qatar and will now remain there along with 10 of the 11 officials. The infected official has been quarantined and is without symptoms, according to the IOC. The team, which will compete under the Olympic flag and includes people from countries including Syria, South Sudan, Eritrea, Afghanistan and Iran, is almost 3 times as big as the inaugural team at the Rio de Janeiro 2016 Olympics, with a total of 29 athletes competing in 12 sports. Meanwhile, IOC President Thomas Bach has once again downplayed concerns about hosting the Olympics in the middle of a global pandemic, saying on Wednesday that the Tokyo Games will be historic. Bach paid tribute to the Japanese people for overcoming challenges to hold the global showpiece. He was speaking when he met Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. Bach reaffirmed that the IOC would do everything to not bring any risk to the Japanese people. Organizers last week announced that spectators would be banned from nearly all venues. Host city Tokyo entered a fresh state of emergency on Monday, which will last until the 22nd of August, as authorities aim to curb rising numbers of COVID-19 infections.
Billions of people around the globe will be glued to their screens, and they will admire the Japanese people for what they have achieved under these very difficult circumstances. And for this, I would once more like to express my heartfelt thanks to each and every Japanese, to all the Japanese people.
Now, moving away from the Olympics, Egypt has introduced a system that works like the famed video assistant referee to its National Basketball League in efforts aimed at reforming the competition. The technology, called Instant Replay System, was introduced this past week during the National Premier Basketball League finals. CGTN's Adel Mahroui brings us more.
The reforms in Egyptian basketball refereeing have gathered pace this month. The final stages of the top domestic league witnessed the introduction of the Instant Replay System, or IRS for short. It's a multi-angle video replay technique similar to video assistant referee in football.
Objection to refereeing decisions are natural in any sport. Basketball is a much faster game than football. Therefore, spotting violations is harder. That's why there is a pressing need to apply the IRS. There are specific regulations, however, it cannot be applied anytime like in football.
A referee can only resort to IRS if there's a mix-up in registering a score with 3 or 2 points in tracking who was involved in a game fight, in affirming proper goaltending, and to ensure that the same player involved in a foul is shooting the ball. The replay technique is also useful to determine an end-of-time shot or foul.
We started with just these 6 rules to apply IRS. There will be more utilization for that system in the future, but right now people are not yet accustomed to its application. We've only recently begun using this technology, and Egypt is only the 2nd or 3rd African nation to adopt the IRS.
Internationally, there are 15 different situations where the IRS is used. Unlike most other sports, only the referee has the right to request an IRS review in basketball. Egypt is testing this technology this season, which is available in only 3 stadiums across the country.
Any new technology can help in improving the sport. We just need to have that system in place in many basketball courts. Unfortunately, that's not an option right now. There's no doubt it's a step forward for Egyptian basketball. In last season's final between Al Ahly and Gezira, there was a decisive basket which we couldn't settle on, despite repeating it several times on the television screen. The IRS will help us avoid such confusion.
The Egyptian Basketball Federation decided to apply the IRS after the country hosted the last Handball World Cup. Because of the nature of the indoors courts, Egypt is now using cameras installed for the World Cup to apply it to basketball and volleyball. Each sport, of course, needs some modifications. In this game, basketball officials say they've included CCTV security cameras to the system installed for handball for more accuracy. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
In football, the Kenya under-23 men's team, the Emerging Stars, departed for the northern city of Bahir Dar in Ethiopia on Wednesday morning for the upcoming Sekafa under-23 championships that kick off on Sunday. The regional tournament previously featured senior players, but the competition has now been reserved for under-23 players, with only 3 senior players allowed in the squad. Coach Stanley Okumbi has included David Odhiambo, Bernard Ochieng and Boniface Mushiri as the senior players in his team. Emerging Stars have been pooled in Group C alongside South Sudan and Djibouti. Now, the world's fastest man